Are you seriously fired up about growing as a leader in business or church-based ministry? Are you feeling somewhat frustrated about not having realized your full potential in what you've been called to do? Could you do with someone to help you get some extra clarity or to be a sounding board for your plans and ideas? Great athletes have coaches, so do great leaders. The right leadership coach for you will result in an increased sense of clarity, direction, and purpose, dramatically increasing the results you achieve. If you're ready to step up, contact Errol to book a free, no-obligation introductory coaching session and see whether Errol is the right coach for you. Errol takes the lessons learned from his own leadership journey and from his extensive research to help leaders and entrepreneurs to step into their biggest challenges and rise to their next level. Email admin@errollawson.com right now to schedule your call.
Hello and welcome again to the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson. And our special guest today is Pastor Léonce Crump Jr. Pastor Léonce, how you doing? Good to have you, man. Pastor Léonce is an author, he's an international speaker, and is the founder and senior pastor of Renovation Church in Atlanta. In 2006, Crump answered God's call to relocate from Tennessee to Atlanta and begin the process of planting Renovation Church. He details the obstacles he and his family faced and the revelations he uncovered during this process in Renovate, Changing Who You Are by Loving Where You Are. Check out the book on Amazon. Pastor Lance, I know I could say so much more about you. Your bio is pretty extensive here. But fill in any gaps, first of all, in your bio for us there, and then give us a glimpse into what you're up to in the world right now.
Yeah, when my wife and I sensed the call to Atlanta, it was a complicated process, and I don't know how much you want to dig up here, but I actually had no interest in being back in Atlanta, so I spent a brief period there in 2004 with the Atlanta Falcons. Okay. I actually played in the NFL. And they traded me to the Saints, where I finished my career at home there in New Orleans. And we always, we've been married about 12 years, had a longing for the West Coast. As a matter of fact, West Coast of the U.S. Okay. When I played for the Saints before I got drafted or traded rather to the Saints, I was trying to get over to San Diego then. And then even in this endeavor of church planting, I always believed, particularly for the type of church we lead, that the West Coast would be the most amenable environment to have what people would say is a multi-ethnic or transcultural, is what we call it, community. Right. And little did I know that that God had other plans, that he wanted us to take the hard road in the burned over remnants of Christendom in the South and plant a church amongst the most divided groups of people that probably still presently exist in the world, but definitely in the U.S. And I think our last two election cycles proved that quite resolutely. And so it's been an interesting few years navigating that with my wife, with my team, with our family, and you know, by God's grace, now we've had a successful launch after 3 failures, and I know we want to get underneath that a little bit. And God has just shown us immense favor, not only in the city but around the world, with church planting in South Africa and South America, the UK. And then several places here in the U.S. and Australia. It's really been an incredible journey to see what God would do with just a little bit of faithfulness, even when there was some fear.
Wow. It's amazing. And, you know, guys, I really recommend go and check out Pastor Léonce on YouTube and Renovation Church online. I did the same a few weeks ago. Came across randomly, don't know how I came across Renovation Church and Pastor Léonce, and began to watch some videos and just a bit of background, and really inspired by how forward thinking the church is and the impact the church is making in the community there. So it made me dig a bit deeper to see like what was the origin story, how did this church come about, and I'm really fascinated to have this conversation, and I hope it's going to help somebody listening who's thinking about ministry, thinking about pioneering, perhaps thinking about just stepping out for the Lord in some way, shape, or form. Could you tell us just a bit about the origin story? What were you doing before ministry, and then how did you transition into ministry?
How much time do you have?
We got as long as it takes, man. We just want to.
I will try to be expedient.
Okay.
I knew I was called to ministry when I was 16 years old.
Okay.
I did not grow up in church. I was late to the faith because my family was late to the faith. We grew up, or my brother and I, and my parents raised us as part-time Catholics and basically moral people. Okay. So try to do right by people. I remember my father telling me once when I was 14, if you have any outside kids, take care of your kids, all of your kids. So it was a very moralistic, but flexible idea of what it meant to be a good man who somewhat believed in God. And that's what we were raised in. And when I was 16 years old was the first time that I encountered the gospel. And there were several things that led up to that moment. My mother tried to commit suicide. Her and my father's marriage got very rocky. Now, they've been married 45 years, which is another beautiful testimony to the grace of God. But there were several periods there where I was sure, even as a child, that we were going to be a divided family. And so there at 16, my mother had come to faith several years before that, and then my father came to faith. And so they started making us go to church. Right. And are
you the oldest of your siblings?
I am the oldest. I'm the oldest of two. Okay. My brother, I don't know if you want to run down this rabbit trail, but my brother actually works for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and reports to 45 every single day.
Wow. Interesting.
So pray for that brother when you think about it. But yeah, I'm the oldest of two. And I came to faith shortly after my father did. And my mother was the first one to tell me that I was supposed to be a pastor. And it actually caused an inverse reaction in me. When she told me that she believed that I was called to ministry, a great fear arose in me at that young age. And I decided that I was going to try and do my best to disqualify myself so that I would not have to be responsible for the faith and for the life and which of course is an errant understanding of what a pastor does, but that was the only idea I had. And I said, so if I do enough dirt, then God can't use me. I didn't understand that God likes to work in through dirty people. And so that was my journey from about 17 to 20. I decided that I wanted nothing to do with this calling, which had been reverberated by 2 or 3 other people in the course of that time. And finally, on a late evening, when I was at university, I played football and wrestled for the University of Oklahoma. And we were partying late one night, and I drank myself into oblivion. And I remember right before I passed out, praying to God, please don't let me die like this. I know that I'm made for more. Please don't let me die like this. And I'll serve you with my life. Next day, I woke up at 4:00 in the afternoon, passed out in some lady's front yard. And I remember running all the way home in tears, bitter tears, wondering what in the world I was doing with my life. And I threw myself into the covers fully dressed, and I just cried for a couple of hours. And then I remembered that there was a college ministry that took place every Thursday evening, and the building was between 2 bars. And the reason why I knew that is because one night we were doing a kind of a bar hop, you know what I'm talking about, where you just go from bar to bar. And I wandered in there because I heard live music, and it turned out they were playing Christian music. And so I just turned right back around and walked out again. And I remembered that church was there. And I walked in and immediately broke down crying. And the pastor there, who turned out to be one of my mentors, one of my greatest mentors, Mike Wilson, grabbed me. We had never met before. And he grabbed me by my collar and he said, "When are you going to stop running from God?" And I had never met this man in my life. And I said, "I'm not running from God," real aggressive. And he just held on. He's like, "You are running from God. You are. And he will have his man." And I just broke down even harder. Wow. And from that day forward, man, I knew the call in which I would walk. I didn't know that it would turn into church planting.
How old were you at this point?
I was 20 years old.
Okay.
So I finished school there at the University of Oklahoma. I competed in Olympic wrestling, almost made the Olympic team. I actually lost to Kerry McCoy, who represented us in 2004, and then went to the NFL. And from there, after several injuries, and we can get into those, I guess, another time, but I knew that my body was not going to sustain a long career. And I leaned into what I knew God had called me to do. So I went on staff at a church in Tennessee because I've been coaching at the University of Tennessee. And from there, my wife and I, purely because the Lord told me to, moved to Atlanta to plant a church. Now that started with an ideation phase. And this is kind of the practical tidbit. I'll let you come in.
Yeah. So, the journey there. So you obviously got married in that time frame as well. You've met your wife at university.
No, actually I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't.
Okay.
I met my wife 2 years after I finished my bachelor's degree at university.
Okay. And you were at the same church in Tennessee?
Yes. And she was there as well. She was actually the worship leader for the college group that I was taking over.
Okay.
And I noticed her on day one.
Wow.
And I went home and I told my father, I met the woman I'm going to marry. He's like, "Boy, get out of here. You crazy." And I married her 9 months later.
Praise God. Praise God.
Yeah, man.
So in this period of time then, so you're in this church and you're on staff. Before you move, what's happening in your heart and in your mind before you decide to make the choice to step out and go to Atlanta?
Yeah. So there were things before Atlanta, and that's a big piece of the story because I actually did not want to go to Atlanta.
Right.
There was this angst inside of me related to the church. And I'm sure you can identify. I was in a church where many of the younger leaders had very little authority, but a lot of responsibility. And so there was no room for new ideas, for innovation, for forward thinking. It was just the program that had been laid out, and we were kind of pieces of that plan. And I was anxious about that. I was anxious about the fact that the church was still an almost wholly racially, ethnically, and economically divided institution, though what I saw in the scriptures was something completely different. In fact, what I saw in the scriptures was God's intent to form a family for himself from all people. And I wasn't seeing that even in the church where I was. I had an angst about the lack of social ingenuity, when historically the church was the engine for social welfare and the engine for social innovation and the engine for seeing good in the world and for seeing human beings flourish. I saw a lot of political conversation, but very little social innovation. And the gospel had been reduced to a message about personal salvation with no societal implications. And I was struggling with it. And so because I had no outlet for it, I just started writing. I started writing all of these things that were filtering through my heart and then blogging about them. And a recruiter from a large church organization ended up finding my blog somehow and engaging me in this conversation about church planting. And that's what kind of sparked the idea. I never even dreamed about planting a church. But after he and I had a lengthy conversation, he started to point out the entrepreneurial plot points of my life. And he said, if you go back and look, everything you've ever done, you started. You've gone to places where there was nothing, and by God's grace made something. And I feel like you are uniquely called to this. And so once I accepted that idea, then I started thinking about where. San Diego, of course, back on the map, Los Angeles. We thought about New Orleans, Louisiana, because that's where I'm from. And then Austin, Texas is a pretty cool city as well. And so my wife and I had all these ideas of where we were going to go. We had maps on the refrigerator. We were praying for God's will. And then I got an interview in Atlanta. And after a lengthy conversation with my wife, I decided to just take the interview just to get it off.
Job interview or?
Yes, to join a church planting organization.
Okay.
They were going to try and plant 30 churches in 30 years. The recruiter, the executive recruiter, connected them with me after he and I talked. He said, man, this is a young man you got to meet. And so we decided to go for it. We went through a fairly lengthy process via email and Skype conversations and things like this. And then we decided to do a face-to-face interview. Well, in that interview, which was about 3 hours long, everything was going great until we got to some of the touchier subjects for me. One being preaching and the necessity of that being a live event with an anointed man or a gifted woman communicator and not a video screen is the point that I'm making. And the necessity that the church would reflect the full breadth of God's creative genius, meaning that whatever peoples the context in which God placed you offers, then those peoples should be represented in the body of Christ. And they were not interested in the fight that it takes to do that. And so after a 3-hour interview, we agreed to disagree and to go our separate ways. Well, on my way home, and I don't know your theological background or even that of the listeners with respect to how God speaks, but on our way home, sitting at a red light, I heard the Lord say very, very clearly, not audibly, not burning bush, but just a thought that I would not otherwise have with crystal clarity, not in my own voice, that this right here is where you will spend your youth. And that was the moment that I knew we were called to Atlanta. And that was the moment that I was called to account for all of my good ideas that I had put on paper. Well, God said, okay, let's see if you can actually flesh them out in reality.
Wow. And you obeyed and you moved?
Reluctantly. Reluctantly obeyed. My wife is the hero of that story. As a matter of fact, we got back to Tennessee. I was writing a 3-year plan to expand our ministry there onto
at the church or what
onto 2 new college campuses.
Okay.
So I was a college pastor,
right?
And we were doing a multi-site model across college campuses, and I was getting ready to add 2 new college campuses.
Okay.
And my wife wakes up in the middle of the night one night, and she says, "Are you awake?" And I say, "Well, I am now." And she says, "I think we're supposed to go to Atlanta." And I said, "The devil is a lie." And I turned over and went back to sleep. That's a true story. You have to ask me sometimes. And so the next day, she was very cold toward me the next morning, unusually. And so finally, I asked her what her problem was, which is not a good question to ask your wife. And it took me 12 years to learn that. And she said, "Léonce, I will follow you anywhere, but into disobedience." Yes. And you know that God has called us to Atlanta. And there's no reason for us not to go other than you don't want to go. And that was the end of that, brother.
Wow. Deal done.
Deal done. 2 weeks later, we packed up and we moved.
Did you have children then?
I had 1 child then. We have 4 now.
Okay.
We had 1 little girl. Then she was 18 months old. And we moved with nowhere to go. Wow. And no one to go to other than a vision on a piece of paper.
Wow.
Which I still have framed on my desk, by the way. I look back at that all the time because I'm still blown away at what God has done in such a short period of time.
That's amazing. And I know the story gets better, right? Because for a lot of people listening, the very notion of starting out, whether in an unknown territory or in their home environment, is just like, where do I start? Where do I go? What do I do? How do I find a team? Do I get a team? Questions. What happened next?
So for me, because of the way that I'm wired, brother, I began, as I said, with a piece of paper. And all of my big talk and blogging, I whittled down to 5 main problems and what the solutions to those problems were. Some of those are already named. That the church is grossly, racially, ethnically, and economically divided. That the church has lost its voice in the public square, meaning in the political arena, in the business world, in the community itself. The church does not address pressing social issues. The church does not step into those kairos moments as she once did around issues like human sexuality and marriage legislation and things like that. And that is the church's role. That the gospel must be more than a message about personal salvation. That Christians must be released to walk in the gifts that God has given them, rather than just build up the body inside of those 4 walls, and that healthy things multiply. And so we should be a multiplying entity. And I wrote those things down. I wrote down what I believed then and still believe to be biblical answers to those problems. And then we went about the business of kind of shaping on paper what church we would like to see God start. But there was one fatal flaw in that whole thing. And this may be particularly related to church planting, but I think it has application, honestly, for any entrepreneurial endeavor, business or otherwise, is that you can't make a plan for people you don't know. And so here I was arriving in a city that I had never lived in, among a people that I did not know their narrative, writing a plan for a church that I wanted them to come to. And that was the first of a series of false starts until I finally got it in my head that maybe, in the business world, we call it market research or demographic data in the political world. In the church world, it is cultural anthropology and cultural exegesis. And that maybe I need to take some time to do the anthropological work and the exegetical work to learn the narrative of this place. Why does a highway cut this neighborhood in half? Why are almost all of the poor relegated to the southwest corner of the city and all of the wealth relegated to the northeast corner of the city? Why do those things exist? What happened when desegregation overturned the political system in the late 60s? And why are market prices driving homes up now in neighborhoods that no one formerly wanted to live in? And where do my neighbors work, and how far do they drive, and what are other churches doing, and where is God already at work? And am I coming into what is essentially a saturated market, trying to do what has already been done? And so after failing, 3 times in 18 months.
So failing, meaning, so you stepped out the first time, right? You've got this 5-point vision, or these 5 problems that you recognize you want to address. And then you leaflets and flyers. Did you knock doors? Did you do radio adverts? Did you put on events? What did you do?
I put on events, knocked doors, tried to do some groundwork relationally, and we just never got the traction.
Okay. And so does a point came where you decided that this ain't working, back to the drawing board?
Yes, it was after the 3rd team. I've always been fairly gregarious. And so we gathered up a team rather quickly. Locally, yeah, just pulling people. I've never met a stranger, brother.
Yo, what's up? How you doing?
And I throw great parties. So we would throw parties and gather people. But here's one of the learnings that we had not gathered yet. is Atlanta is one of the most transient cities in the nation.
Right.
And so the people who are with you in month one may only be there for 3 months.
Right.
And so what was on our third failed attempt, what was a team of 35 in about 9 weeks became a team of 6 because people just moved away for varying reasons.
Please go into the detail a little bit, though, about how you got 35 people to get out on your third church. Like, it's a big number. It's a good number of people. Like, if you've grown up there and you went to school and high school and uni and with all these people, and that's one thing. But you're new in the state. How did you find 35 people so quickly?
By becoming a local, which was pretty innate. I'm finding, and I really, one of the terms we use here is I weaponized that later. But it was really by finding out where people were and putting myself as strategic places of intersection. So we attended art shows. I joined the Chamber of Commerce. I joined local neighborhood associations. Tried to ask as many questions as I could, had people in our homes for dinner, and just really went about strategically building a network through both relational means as well as strategic board and business endeavors and being involved in community activism. So that's how I went about gathering up those people so quickly.
That's great. And that was the third attempt. You had 35, went down to 6 in a matter of weeks.
Yes.
And then what happened next?
I thought we were done.
Really?
And I started making a plan for our exit strategy. Wow. And it just so happened that a friend of mine was planting a church in Miami, and they were doing exceptionally well. They were getting ready to go multi-site, and he called me. And he asked me if I would like to be their campus pastor. And he said, I know that you are very resolute about preaching the word. And I want you to know that we're not going to do a video venue here. You'll be preaching every Sunday there, unless you're preaching here at the main campus and I'm preaching there. And this is really going to be a partnership. And so I allowed this to convince me for a season that Atlanta was a whittling ground, so to speak, where God was cutting away some things to prepare us for Miami, right? And so I got my vision together and I set my wife down, and we're in dire straits, brother. You know, we're eating red beans and rice every day. The lights are cut off. The heat's about to get cut off. We're 15 days from being evicted. I'm trying to decide if we're going to move back in with my parents. Wow. We have no money. We have nothing. Wow. And I'm sure that we're done. I'm like, Brianna, I can go and make a life for us, but it's not going to happen here. And for the second time, this was in January of 2009. For the second time, my wife says to me, I told you in Tennessee, I'm going to tell you again, I love you. I will follow you anywhere except into disobedience. Wow. And I truly believe that God has called us to Atlanta. And so I stepped back and sorted my feelings. I called my mom and one of my spiritual parents, Miss Kathy, and they prayed with me. And I came out of that season resolute that come hell or high water, so to speak, that until God spoke audibly from the sky, that we were going to fight to stay in Atlanta and do the work that he called us to do.
Wow. And so you obviously you stayed and you started building again. You found
we stayed.
Faith, courage.
Yeah. You know, here's the thing. As an entrepreneur, particularly starting something that has never been done, you have to be convinced. You have to be convinced that the vision you have is more important than any personal triumphs, or personal emotions tied to any measures of success that you've made up in your mind. You have to be convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. Because here's what happens is if and when success comes, and new people come along and new ideas and new opportunities and new doors open, if your vision is not the metric by which you measure opportunities and leaders and outcomes, well, then you'll drift. And that's when you see organizations that started strong, people that started strong, drift into irrelevance. And so that vision and of course God's leading is what catalyzed me to remain strong throughout that entire ordeal. And my wife's kindness and my wife's strength and my wife's refusal to allow me to just be disobedient and run toward the easier option. And so, we started again and we began to build again with a handful of folks.
And how many years ago was that?
That was in January of 2009.
Okay.
And so from January of 2009 to about April, we just met as a small Bible study of 6 people.
Right.
Talked through what it would be like to be a church one day. Somewhere in the middle of that, I met a man named Bob Cargo, who was the church planting director at Perimeter Church. And it turned out that Perimeter here in the States had also failed a few times at trying to plant in the neighborhood where I was living. And they had heard of the early success we had with some of the trouble we had. And he thought that a partnership could actually produce a healthy church. So he reached out to me. We had a great meeting. They ended up offering me a residency at their church. And so I went to our small team at that time and I said, hey, they want me to do a 2-year residency. I told them I would do 1. They agreed to it. And so for the next year, I'm going to be virtually on staff at Perimeter Church in their residency. And in May of 2010, when this ends, then we will get about the business of finishing this church plan. And so that's precisely what we did. And so in May of 2010, my team and I held a vision night where we invited 3 relationships each to come and hear the vision of the church and what it was going to be. And somehow, some way, we will call it God's grace. That night, about 75 people showed up for our vision.
Wow.
And out of that 75, we kept 30.
Okay.
And I spent the next 6 months training them in everything that I had learned over the previous 2.5 years. Right. Cultural anthropology, the history of the city, apologetics, gospel relationships, how to be marketplace Christians and not be marketplace workers and then Sunday Christians, right. and navigate all of those things. And in November of 2010, we had our first preview service. We had about 80 people show up for that. In December, we had our second, and that was about 90 people. And then we launched live gatherings the weekend of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday in 2011. And we had 185 people show up for that first service. Wow. And we've been rolling ever since, bro.
Wow. Praise God. I'm so inspired. I'm so inspired by the story and the testimony. I hope you are too, listening. You're getting some courage here. Like courage has been poured into us here to step out and believe, walk on the water almost, even when it seems like where the resource is going to come from, where's the manpower going to come from. It is literally about stepping out that entrepreneurial mindset.
Yes.
How does somebody cultivate and develop? Maybe they're listening and they're thinking, well, I'm just not an entrepreneur. I'm just not a networker or a connector with people. Is there a way to develop that and become more entrepreneurial?
I believe so. I believe when we are self-aware and we can connect our great passions to the great needs of an area or of a people or even the world, then there will be an internal spark that will allow us to endeavor in these things. And then I think what sustains us is clarity of vision, and an understanding that it has to be flexible. That's what you learn in every entrepreneurial book I've ever read is it's a roller coaster, it's a wave, and you'll hit these peaks where everything seems to be working and everything seems to be right.
Is there a parallel almost between entrepreneurship and church planting? What's the relationship between the two in your mind?
Well, church planting is an entrepreneurial endeavor. In fact, to the guys in my church who are in the business community, I tell them all the time, they've got an easy job. They are selling products that people already desire in a market that can't get enough. And I am, and I'm throwing this in air quotes, selling a product that nobody even knows they want in a market where they've been told that they don't need it. So they are actually at an advantage that I believe ministers of the gospel and church planters simply don't have. And so the parallel that I see is this is more than a spiritual endeavor. We have to have systems. We have to have processes. We do long-term planning and strategic meetings, financial development models to make sure that we are good stewards and wisely use our resources for longevity. And so there really is no separation other than we are in a spiritual enterprise, which I personally believe any endeavor can be a spiritual enterprise if the motivation for that endeavor is a further revelation of the kingdom, even if it's not preaching the gospel every Sunday.
So what's one of the biggest lessons you learned along that journey?
Oh, man, the biggest lesson I learned, even as much as I talk about vision, is that culture eats vision. Culture eats vision. And I'm not talking about skin color or even the culture in which you grew up. I mean, organizational culture eats vision. So I'll do it in story form. You know, we always wanted to be a transcultural community, which means we wanted a community where people did not have to assimilate to be family, but that the gospel actually transversed our individual cultures such that I can be me and you can be you, and we can be this woven tapestry of God's people while maintaining the unique way that he has made us and shaped us and formed us. And so that has been our stated goal from the first day, but there's been ebbs and flows in that. When we started, we were about 80% white. By year 2, we were 80% black. Now we are about 45% white, about 45% black, and 10 to 15% everything else. Wow. About 30 nationalities in all in our community.
Fascinating.
And that's always been our stated vision, but it has not always been our culture. Right. And so the feel, can people see themselves in your community when they walk in, you know, or even in your business? I'll take it to the business world. I'm an avid reader of Men's Health magazine. But it wasn't up until a couple of years ago that there were any products ever advertised in that magazine that I could actually use. Everything they advertised was for straight hair and products that would be used by white people, to the point where at one juncture, I just stopped reading the magazine altogether, because I said, these people, even though they've never come out and said, we don't care about black people and what black people want, everything they do says that. And somewhere along the way, when the last 2 or 3 years, they made a significant and conscious shift to where you see more people of color, you see more products that benefit people of color in their advertisements, you see more opportunities to tell the narratives of people of color. And so they had a culture shift that now aligns with their vision, which was to be a men's magazine for men from all over the world.
So as the leader of your church, or the architect, if you like, of the culture in your church, and, you know, some amazing kind of transitions have happened, what are the pillars now within your church culture that have helped you to create or build a culture and environment in which you've got that level of diversity?
Yeah. So the primary pillar is equal authority and representation and contextual accuracy. And this is what I tell people all the time. if you have contextual accuracy, you've won. If you do more than that, praise God. But if you're in a context that is like the city of Atlanta, almost 50% African American, but your church is 100% white, then you're not winning. You have established a culture that is repelling that people group. And I would say the same for any other homogenous or monoethnic environment. And so I think those would be the two primary pillars: is understanding that representation matters, and not in the sense of tokenism. It has to be representation with authority and the ability to influence the culture. And the other piece is a constant monitoring, if you will, of contextual accuracy. So with this move, we're going to move into a population that is almost primarily Latino. What do you think I'm spending half of this year doing? Just for me personally.
Yeah, just studying those people, the culture,
and learning Spanish.
Wow. Okay.
So my wife and I just started taking Spanish courses, because if I'm going to be the chief cultural architect and I want to have contextual accuracy in the place where we are planted, then at the bare minimum, I've got to be able to speak the language of the people to whom God is sending us. And then there will be other things that go along with that. There will be staffing that takes place. There will be branding that takes place. There will be an assessment of how our processes work to make sure that they are culturally affirming to people who have not previously been a part of our community. It really will be a step back and a look at everything that we do to say, are we repulsive to this group of people? Or have we at least pulled down as many hurdles as possible so that only the gospel and the difficulty with receiving that message is the hurdle that they would have to being a part of this community.
It's beautiful, beautiful. Contextual accuracy and representation, but not authoritative, so not tokenistic, but giving real authority and
that's exactly right.
Authority to make decision. Fantastic, and that's a formula. I think, guys, if you're listening, I think it works anywhere. It will at least get you started. And I know that there are churches in the UK that are wrestling with this dynamic with, immigration or migration from different parts of the world, people coming in with different cultures and now coming into churches where maybe it was once a white populace. Now there's a whole mix, and the new people that are coming in are not seeing the representation authoritatively, and it's like, do we belong here, And
that's exactly right. And that's the question that's always asked. Do we actually? Well, we want everyone to belong, but you don't, because everything that you do caters to one group of people.
Wow. We talked quite a bit today about, church planting, the journey, the building. I know you're still young, but when you think of legacy, what does legacy mean to you?
Yeah. For me, legacy means leaving as little of me behind as possible.
Expand on that for us.
I want to fade into the vision that we have executed. I don't want to be remembered as a great man. I want to be remembered as a part of something great. And that is a delineation that I haven't heard a lot of people make. And it's something that I've really just started thinking about lately is I don't want to be remembered for having come up with the word transcultural. I don't want to be remembered for leading a large influential church. I want the entity and the impact to be remembered, and I just want to be associated with it. And I think that is a legacy worth leaving.
It's powerful. I feel like we could have like 2 or 3 interviews, because this is brilliant stuff, man. If someone's listening now wants to find out some more about you and the work you're doing, and where do they go? How do they find out about you? Do you have any social media handles or a website you could share?
Yeah, if you look at Léonce Crump, LeonceCrump, if you just put that in Google, or just Léonce Crump in Google, you'll find anything you need to know. That is both fortunate and unfortunate. Some old pictures out there still circulate.
Brilliant. Okay. And just a parting word. As somebody listening now who's maybe a young leader or entrepreneur, and they're hearing and they're inspired, they're just listening to every word. Just a parting word of encouragement for them, Pastor Léonce, just to send them on their way.
Yeah. Everything has a season and a time. Learn how to be under authority, and you will know how to be in authority. Keep clarity of vision, and you'll never lose sight of what it is that God has placed in your heart to do.
Amen. Amen. Pastor Léonce, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Hey, thank you for the time, brother.
God bless you. Thank you again for joining us today on the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast. I pray you've been inspired, you've been lifted, you've been encouraged to take your personal leadership to the next level. We really encourage you guys to just take action, make it happen, do something, start somewhere, go out and change the world in some way, big or small. Guys, if you've enjoyed the podcast today, please share with your friends, share with your loved ones, your colleagues, someone out there you think might benefit from hearing this great content. And if you want some more questions answering, you got a question, email me, Errol@errollawson.com. Or if you want a free 30 to 45 minute coaching session with myself around the leadership challenge or issue you're working on in your business, your church, or in your organization, please feel free to email me right away. We'll get you booked in. It's Errol@errollawson.com. Thank you again for listening. Go to our iTunes page, check it out, check out the previous episodes, give us a nice review, that would be awesome. Really appreciate if you could do that for us. We really appreciate you just for being here and listening. Thank you so much. God bless you, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Rising Generation.